There's a couple I know. Let's call them Marcus and Alicia. When you walk into their home, you feel it immediately. There's a peace there, a rhythm, a quiet understanding between them that isn't loud or flashy, but it's strong. They laugh easily. They speak kindly to each other. And sure, they disagree, but they don't tear each other down. They make space for each other's needs without keeping score. And you can tell without them saying a word that their marriage is a safe place for both of them. Now, here's what's powerful. What you're sensing in their relationship isn't just chemistry or compatibility, it's culture. Because you see, Marcus and Alicia have built a marriage culture on purpose, one of respect, emotional safety, intentional habits, and mutual understanding. And while it may look effortless to you, I can promise you it wasn't accidental. Hey, welcome back to the High Ticket Woman. I'm Debbie Cobbitle, your host for today. And this is the podcast for women and men who are done settling for surface level relationships and are ready to dive into emotional, spiritual, and relational growth. I'm so glad you're back. Hey, today we're talking about something you may never have considered before. Your marriage has a culture, but who's shaping it? You know, every marriage has a culture. You might not have created it on purpose, and you might not even be able to describe it, but it's there. It's the atmosphere of your relationship. I mean, how you talk to each other, how you handle stress, how you connect or don't, how you make decisions, how you resolve conflict. But the real question is, who's shaping it? I want you to think about the culture of a company, or an organization, like, or a church, or even a family. You know, it's not just what they say they believe that forms the culture. It's the way things are actually done. It's the unspoken rules, the rhythms, the values that guide people's behavior. Well, it's the same in marriage, right? The culture within your marriage is formed by your habits, good or bad, the way you talk to each other on a regular basis, the way you handle problems in your marriage, the emotional climate. Is it is it good weather in your marriage, or is it a pretty frosty environment? Or is it, a volcano going off every other day? The shared routines that you have, or, the lack of them. And yeah, even your family of origin, all of that shapes the culture within your marriage. For example, if you grew up in a home where, people yell to get their point across, that might feel really normal to you. But if your spouse grew up in a home where conflict was avoided at all costs, like nobody raises their voice at each other, then your spouse is a lot more likely to shut down when tension rises. Okay. I think about my parents and what I see between them. There's a lot of my parents are both very independent people, and they are always sort of teasing and poking at each other. And honestly, it's kind of stressful for me. Like, it comes across as bickering. It doesn't that's not how they feel about it with for them, but when I observe their marriage, like, that's not something that I want for me and Jeff. Like, it comes across to me like they're sort of always arguing, but that's part of their culture in their marriage. And, those early experiences that we have as kids, I've talked before, or maybe that episode hasn't come out yet, so I will be talking about those expectations, often hidden, that shape the way we do things in our marriage. So when two different cultures in marriage collide, what happens? We've got confusion, we've got frustration, we've got conflict, right? So many times we're living out a culture that we didn't actually choose. We just maybe inherited, right? And that's why being intentional is so critical. Because if you just default to the culture that you grew up with, well, Okay, I'm not saying your marriage is toxic, but it might not be healthy either, right? So here are some signs of having an unintentional marriage culture, right? Where you're just defaulting to what you know. Okay. You repeat the same arguments without any resolution, right? You're never getting anywhere. You're fighting over the same things and nothing's ever getting solved. Or you avoid having difficult conversations, right? You're just kicking the can down the road. Or you operate like roommates instead of partners. Or there's no shared connection or agreement on what you want your future to look like, like a vision for you as a couple and as a family. Or one of you is carrying most of the load, maybe financially or emotionally or logistically. One of you's doing more things around the house than the other, or paying more of the bills, or being, the provider of everybody's emotional needs. Another way that you might be having an unintentional marriage culture is that you feel more comfortable talking about the problems in your marriage to other people, venting to other people than you do to your own spouse, right? Now again, these things don't necessarily mean that your marriage is in crisis, but it does mean that the culture in your marriage isn't working for one or both of you, right? And unless you call it out, nothing's going to change. Because here's the thing, whatever you tolerate, it's going to become your new norm, right? What you ignore is going to settle in and become a pattern. And what you never talk about, it becomes this wall that divides you. So, how do you actually reset the culture in your marriage? Because you can do that, right? You don't have to, if you've got a culture in your marriage that's not working, and you recognize that you guys are both defaulting to cultures that are clicking and blending, together, what do you do? Well, the first thing you gotta do is you gotta, like, acknowledge what you have, right? You gotta name the current culture that you have, because you can't change what you don't actually define. So ask yourself, how do we handle tension? How do we talk to each other about difficult stuff? How do we express when we're happy and appreciative and grateful in this marriage? How do we show up for each other emotionally? How do we decide what really matters? What can we let go of? What do we need to hold on to? When you bring those questions into a conversation with your spouse, again, not in a critical way, I say this all the time, but just as an honest evaluation of here's where we are, and we're acknowledging that. Now what do we want to do from there? Um, Now you can begin to change this, right? You also have to talk about what you came from. You gotta talk about how your family history has shaped you. We all have emotional reflexes, right? Things that we just do automatically. They are so habitual to us. So talk about what felt normal in your home growing up. Were emotions suppressed or were they expressed? Whether that was in a healthy way or not in a healthy way. What did it look like? Was conflict handled openly, or was it avoided? Or was it handled behind closed doors where you didn't see much of that as a kid? Were there boundaries between your mom and dad in healthy ways? Boundaries between them and you guys as kids? You know, Boundaries are absolutely essential, but we've got different kinds of boundaries, right? I've talked about that in a previous podcast episode. Some boundaries are really, really rigid, inflexible, and they really are designed to protect us from hurt. We're guarded and we don't trust. So we have these very, very inflexible boundaries. Or we have boundaries that are super permeable, super negotiable, and I call those speed bumps, right? But then we have gates, or sometimes I've had people call them doors, which I like that metaphor too. Gates are doors that open and close based on mutual respect. So what did that look like in your home growing up? And how was affection expressed in your home, right? Did you grow up in a very loving home? Were they touchy-feely? Lots of hugs, lots of kisses, hand-holding, or was it withheld? You know? N I mean, I've worked with way too many people who tell me that they grew up in homes where there was really a lack of affection. Well, okay, if you aren't intentional about changing that, then that is something that you have absorbed and are going to default to in your marriage. But chances are you're gonna be married to somebody who grew up very differently than you in that way. So understanding your roots helps you to, I guess we could call it, see the blueprint, right? That you yourself have been living from, right? And that's what now gives you the clarity to know what needs to be changed. And the next step is we'll decide what kind of culture you wanna have, that you wanna build in your marriage. So now this is where we start to get really intentional. So you ask yourself and your partner things like, "Okay, here's what our marriage feels like right now, but what do we want it to feel like? What kind of atmosphere do we want to have in our home? You know, do how do we want to communicate even when we're upset with each other?" This isn't about pretending or faking just in front of other people, right? This is about this is what we're like even when it's just the 2 of us and nobody sees. I have to tell you, moving from my first marriage to this second and only marriage with Jeff, I'm done, I'm not doing this again, God willing. Um, it's so easy to create have I mean, Jeff and I just sort of naturally created this atmosphere, this culture, and I would define our culture in our marriage as a culture of peace and harmony. Um, we we said right from the beginning, we are not gonna sweat the small stuff, and just like the book called that name says, virtually everything is small stuff, right? So, we were very intentional right up front, like, let's not beat each other up over all these little nitpicky things, right? That's a part of our marriage culture. You wanna create small habits in your marriage that support the culture you wanna build, right? Because culture is reinforced through repetition. So start small. That might mean, like, we're checking in, like, maybe you do it daily, maybe you do it weekly, maybe you do it once a month, but check in on, like, how do you feel about our marriage, the culture in our marriage? How do I feel about it? Maybe you guys have, like, a little rule, like, at night no phone for an hour so we can connect and we can talk and we can be intentional. Um, in my first marriage, one of the things that we agreed on was we're never going to say shut up to each other ever. And so we didn't. And I've carried that culture over into my relationship with Jeff. And he doesn't say it to me either. Instead, and we're very thankful and appreciative. That's another part of our marriage culture. We say thank you to each other for the smallest things. We're always looking for opportunities to verbalize how much we appreciate what the other person does so that they never feel taken for granted. You know, you don't need to overhaul your marriage in one conversation, and you're not gonna be able to anyway, right? You just need to start identifying what you wanna build, and then okay, here's another metaphor, you just start laying each little marital brick by brick, by brick, by brick. Now, not to build a wall between the 2 of you, right? But a brick of intentionality, right? To create that very purposeful culture that you want in your marriage for your sakes, because it will bring you peace, it will bring you joy, but also it radiates out and it has a positive effect on your children, it has a positive effect on everybody around you. People will want to be around you, to spend time with you. People will remark on how happy you are, and this is something that I take a lot of pleasure in my marriage with Jeff, is that people will say all the time, or they'll post on social media, "You guys look so happy." Well, it's true. We are. We are so happy, but it's because we've created a culture that is very purposeful and intentional. We've talked about it, we've worked on it, and we have it. So let me ask you again, who's shaping the culture of your marriage? Your childhood? Your parents' marriage? Society? Who's shaping it? Because if you're not doing it intentionally, chances are something else is, right? Stress can shape it, past wounds can shape it, busyness can shape it, unspoken resentment can shape it, and on we could go, right? But you have the power to change that. Culture isn't just something you live in, it's something you create. Thanks for joining me today. If this episode helped you in any way, please share it. Please leave a review. And if you're ready to reset your emotional and relational foundation, please check out my 2 courses, The Path Less Traveled and Beauty from Ashes. Right now, for a limited time only, I've slashed $400 off the original price, and they are now both just $99. So drop the word enroll in the comments, and I'll send you a promo code. You know what? Hey, let's walk this out together, one intentional step at a time. I'll see you next week.